helping students and healthcare professionals not just survive, but thrive with a purpose. This is the CMDA Student Pulse podcast with your host, Bill Reichart, National Director of CMDA Campus Ministries.
Christmas is coming, the snowflakes will be falling. It's the most wonderful time of year.
Well, welcome to this December Ho 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 Christmas special of CMDA's Student Pulse podcast. I'm Bill Reichart, National Director for Campus and Community Ministries here at CMDA and also known as St. Nick. We have a very special episode today. It is a clip show. We're going to show some excerpts from some of the very best CMDA Student Pulse podcasts. Now, let me say in advance, we've had great conversations, great guests throughout the year. So these are, by being best, what we think are some of the topics that you think have been the most interesting, conversations that you have interacted with the most. And so we're going to make them available, and you'll have a chance to hear the full conversation as well as we put those links in the show notes. And doing a show like this gives our staff, who have been so dedicated in pulling this podcast off, an opportunity to take some time off. But I want to thank the staff who have made this podcast possible. Our production staff, our studio staff, Rusty, Scott, and Jared. The time and effort that they put on in doing the video and audio versions and all the editing, as well as the executive producer of our podcast, Pam, who works with our guests and helps schedule all the fantastic guests that we've been able to have. And of course, I want to thank our guests who have had just incredible opportunities to share their ministries, their insights. The conversations that we've been able to have just been stellar. So thank you all for all the hard work in making this possible. So without further ado, here we go. Well, you stand up courageously in the way you do, but you get, again, that some of that feedback that can be negative, it can be hostile at times. But you've talked often about how it's important that when we receive that, we respond not in kind, but in love. Can you talk a little bit about that? Why that's important?
Well, yes, it's everything, especially as a Christian. I mean, we are supposed to speak the truth in love, and this is from Ephesians 4:14 and 15. Mm-hmm. The thing that's interesting is people will constantly say that, particularly those who want to deride Christians and say, you're not speaking the truth in love, as they are throwing all kinds of venom and shade our way. But the interesting thing is they forget the first part often, speak. And too often we choose not to speak, and that's not loving. So finding out how we can communicate and how we can message on these things is really crucial, and how we convey these things. But it's never an option not to speak or it's not an option to be silent, especially in our culture. We don't have the luxury of this kind of silence. That's not to say being wise and using discernment. At sometimes you can remain quiet because you want to wait for the time to answer. I'm not talking about that type of thing. But the approach that too many Christians today take is silence. And they think that is loving. I'm being compassionate. I'm being inclusive and all that. I just, we live in a culture that demands tolerance, and actually it's more than tolerance now, it's compliance. But we have to differentiate between love and tolerance. Love lifts people out of their circumstances, and tolerance keeps people where they are and pretends that there are no circumstances. And so we have to figure out how we love people well, and love the people that we would love to hate. Because to be honest, it's hard to love some people some of the time, or maybe a lot of people a lot of the time. I will say it's easy to do the name calling. Mm-hmm. It's easy to demean other people. That stuff is easy. It takes virtually no effort. As someone who has been a creative director and loves, creating stuff that's fearless, factual, and freeing, it's hard. It's hard to figure out, okay, how can we say this differently? How can we approach this differently? Mm-hmm. But that's what we have to do. And so it may not be this landscape change. It may just be one or two people. It may be 5 or 10, but it's worth it because you've not demeaned who they are as a human being in the process of communicating truth.
Right. Yeah. It's so important isn't it, to remember the Imago Dei, that the person standing in front of us is created in the image of God. So let's say a student or student group, a CMDA group, runs afoul of some of these potential issues that you just described. How should they respond? What? So oftentimes there's a lot of intimidation baked into this. It's a fear of getting in trouble in some way that's going to upend their medical career, their training, and so flying under the radar, trying to keep a low profile. It's easy for students to feel maybe intimidated quickly as they're maybe asked to go to the dean's office. We've seen that oftentimes, those conversations that students are a part of that often create a lot of anxiety and challenge. So let's say a student or student group is faced with these issues. What would be their first approach? What would be their first step in terms of addressing these issues as they would come up?
Well, I mean, the first approach is just to start a dialogue with whoever's in charge, whoever's making that decision. If it gets denied, don't just allow the denial to sit there. Just ask the questions. Ask questions. Mm-hmm. Hey, what policy did you apply? What was the basis? What evidence did you rely upon in applying that policy? Mm-hmm. Is this policy been applied this way in the past? And just engage in it. Give them the benefit of the doubt, but ask questions. Don't be afraid to question. And then to say, hey, I found this policy. It appears that we comply. I'm confused about why this was denied. And then try to gather information. And then if you can't, if you feel like after gathering that it wasn't applied correctly, then you can always reach out to us and say, at ADF and say, hey, here's what happened. What do you guys think? Is this an issue? ADF is a ministry where we do everything we do for free. It's pro bono. There's no charge to you. This is why we're here. You're not bothering us. This is why we're here. We want to help students like you bring the gospel to a very dark place, the universities where it's really needed. So reach out to us and we would evaluate it and say, yeah, you've got a claim here. And then we try to work with them where we help the students try to work it out directly. We try to not to get involved unless absolutely necessary. It's not our goal to create litigation. It's our goal to allow students to have the full benefit of their resources on campus and not be discriminated against because of their beliefs. And if we can do that through a simple email, then that's great. I don't want to complicate their life through a lawsuit. My goal is just to help them be able to most efficiently carry out the goals of their group.
Tie in a little bit some of the lessons learned from dancing professionally and how those apply, in your opinion, to medical school for you.
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. There's so much. I think that ballet, I'm so grateful for that experience, but I would never want to repeat it. I think there are a number of things. One of those being, I think coming to the end of myself and seeing truly how much I need the Lord and just having that relationship with God. Because again, I had all the head knowledge, but there's something between that 12-inch drop from your head to your heart that makes a difference. Because I think that has transformed the way that I've approached medical school, and it's transformed the way I live life now. To really, it's all His, and I'm gonna go all in for Him. But He's the only one I want at the end of the day. And I think also that heart, I think, helps kind of you be like a Daniel, a bit of striving for excellence in your career, but at the same time, excellence in your relationship with God, because the relationship with God becomes far more important than any achievement that you could get in the medical field. And I think with that, kind of the same vein, I've talked to a lot of students about this idea of having to jump through so many hoops in medicine, you receive so many labels of either stars when you do something right or dots when you do something wrong, to steal from the childhood book of You Are Special by Max Lucado. But it's so easy in this profession to either be covered with these stars or to be covered with these dots, and to realize none of that matters. Only my identity in the Lord really matters, and who He's created me to be is what matters. Like, yes, I'm going to give it my all, but at the end of the day, people don't determine my self-worth and self-value. Only He does. And I've been able to have so many beautiful conversations with friends. And I think that's another thing of being an older student and having lived life, of having gone pursued a career already, having been out in the world a bit, and then to come in here to be able to share these experiences with my classmates has been such a gift. And I think the third thing is this idea of being a unicorn. This is something that we talk a lot about at Mayo, or at least I talk about people with here at Mayo, because to get into a program like this, you had to be this fantasy animal in whatever world you were coming from. You were not only just the top of your field, but you were the unusual one. And now all of a sudden you're surrounded by a host of other unicorns. So that identity is no longer there. And I think that has been such a unique conversation to have with people of you can't find your identity in what you do anymore. And people will still try. And I think that's something you see a lot in M1 is people are grappling for, where do I stand? I'm somewhat failing in classes. I'm struggling to be the type of student I thought I was. And to have that realization that that's anchored in something outside of what you do is quite incredible. But it also is an incredible time to share the gospel with people.
Oh, amen. What do you say to students that face this dilemma? They were given certain assurances, maybe something has changed on the ground, whatever the circumstances, and now they're in a situation where now they're being pressed upon to do something that they thought they made quite clear was not going to be within the purview of what they wanted to engage with. And so, yeah, speak to that issue a little bit, Kara. How do you coach through that?
Right. Unfortunately, we have had that happen, not on as huge a scale as I think students fear,
Okay.
but we have had this happen on smaller scales and in nuances that the program director didn't anticipate would be a problem. So I think the first thing to encourage the student to do is to calm down as much as possible. This is extremely important, and their fears and their worry and their anxiety are all appropriate because, as I keep pointing out, your conscience is one of the most important things that you should keep, your integrity, throughout your medical training. However, the most important thing to remember is that, hopefully, if you're, part of CMDA and you're being helped by conscience in residency, you are aided by the fullness of the truth, who is not just a list of doctrines. He's a person. He loves you. He's all powerful. So the first thing to remember is that you are not alone. You have him, and then you also have people who have been through this before. The second thing to remember is that very likely this is a communication problem. This is just a mistake. It is not a malicious thing. It is sometimes, I'm not going to lie to you, sometimes it is very much trying to get the applicant or the resident to do something they don't want to do. But that too, we have ways of speaking around that. So the most important thing is that you meet with your program director and you not be alone. You have to have an advocate, an ombudsman, and someone with you, because you cannot witness these conversations alone, as they sometimes become extremely important. I don't say that to get your tinfoil hats out. I just say that for prudence sake. The next thing to speak about is you want to understand that as a resident, there are a lot of incentives for your program to keep you. And I'm speaking mostly about financial incentives. So they are incentivized by CMS, Center for Medicaid and Medicare. They are paid by them for you, and they keep some of those funds. If they lose you, they lose that. And until they replace you, they don't get that. So there are some incentives for them to keep you. Remember, that's kind of the poker chips in your corner, so that you're not completely defenseless. You should not feel as though you have to comply, otherwise you're going to be fired. You are in a vulnerable position as a resident because that is sort of the job you need to become board certified, and it's very tough and very tricky, and sometimes very you could be uprooted if you have to go find another position. But 90% of the time, you do not have to do that. You should have a conversation with your program director and say, I'm sorry we didn't get to this. I didn't think that we would have to address this separately, but I want to go forward without doing X, Y, Z, and here's the reason why. And just like we talked about at the beginning of my residency or during my interviews, that I want to be a good resident. I want to learn. I don't want to dump work on other people. I want to find a solution that will work for all of us if I'm choosing this. I think always having an attitude of a good resident who wants to be a team player, helps in these conversations. Always being very self-aware, right? Not being ashamed of your beliefs, but being aware that actually all of our beliefs, mine, probably people listening, they do cause some inconvenience in the machine that is the residency. So being self-aware about that, and again, not being ashamed, but being factual about it really is helpful. And then finally, always being ready to learn and be held accountable for the things the residency wants to teach you. So if they want to teach you the American College of OBGYN's guidelines on second trimester termination of pregnancy, you learn that stuff. And I think it's important for people, especially Christians who might have a natural repugnance toward that kind of thing, to overcome our repugnance. Repugnance is not a sin. Repugnance doesn't mean we are personally sinning. It's just, it's a barometer to help us avoid sin, right? But sometimes that barometer gives you kind of false positives and you say, okay, I hate this, but I'm going to do this because this is how God is making me a pro-life Christian doctor, or insert however you want to practice doctor. And so you overcome that repugnance, you study what you ought to do. And then I encourage people, again, every person has his or her conscience, but I encourage people that you are able to counsel completely on things, even if they are against your beliefs, even if you believe they're objectively sinful. And the reason why I tell people that you can counsel completely is not because I want you to be an accessory to evil. I don't want you to cooperate in evil. There's actually a whole nuanced conversation about cooperation in evil that we have. But it's because your counseling is actually better than anyone else's, right? You alone, the Christian resident alone, or the person who believes that XYZ, insert whatever is wrong, they will counsel completely about that, right? They will describe what abortion is. They will describe what transgender hormones do. They will tell you about the risks and about the permanence of those hormones, for example. Whereas other people might say, looks like you need this. This is what our guidelines are recommending. This is how the dose starts. This is how we monitor. And they'll give very important information. They won't counsel completely on risks and benefits. And so that's why I encourage the Catholics to counsel on tubal ligation. I encourage the Catholics to counsel on contraception. I encourage every Christian counsel on abortion, and counsel not to the extent where you're running behind in clinic, but counsel completely, and encourage your residency that you're not going to make everyone else talk to the people who want birth control or termination of pregnancy or transgender hormones. I think that goes a long way to helping people understand, okay, this resident isn't bigoted. They're not trying to get in the way. They are just trying to not do something themselves, but they won't get in the way of other people making their free choices. And again, that's not because we believe those choices are good, but it's because as a resident, your power to cause changes in those choices is extremely limited.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed those clips. And as I said earlier, you can get the links of those full episodes and full conversations in the show notes. And of course, we encourage you to explore the library of other conversations we have on our YouTube channel, or check the previous audio podcasts in your podcast feed. Well, the conversations don't end here. We've got a tremendous slate of future conversations moving into 2024, a bunch of guests that we've already recorded, and we're looking forward to drop them right into your podcast feed. So stay tuned to more to come. But in the meantime, would you give us a little gift? Would you rate and review us, especially the audio podcast, or do the same on our YouTube channel? Of course, those reviews and those ratings help get this content out to more people and allow us to be more visible and recognized. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, taking a minute to do that, that would be greatly appreciated. Well, until the next time I see you, which will be 2024, I hope you have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. CMDA's Student Pulse podcast is a production of the Christian Medical and Dental Associations. The opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are not necessarily endorsed by the organization. CMDA is non-partisan and does not endorse political parties or candidates for public office. The views expressed on Student Pulse podcast reflect judgments regarding principles and values held by CMDA and its members.